Welcome back. You've probably heard me say recently that I enjoy playing the Scandinavian Defense as my response to e4. And here I'm going to try to explain why. If you learned something from this video, then great. And if you already know more than I do, or you notice that I missed something, please feel free to tell me in the comments. Now, perhaps the main thing that I like about it is that the opponents are not familiar with it. If you look at the Masters database of games on Lichess, when white opens with e4, the most common response by far is c5. These are in master games, which are not mine. And the second most common response, about half as common, is e5, which we actually see more at our level. Then you have e6 and c6, d6, even g6 comes before d5, which is the seventh most common response. Fairly rare. Now at our level, in the player's database, it's a little more common. But still, if you look at the numbers of games, e5 and c5 add up to about 100 million, and e6, which is the French, is another 17 million. So add those up together, 117 million compared to only 11 million of d5. So that means that your opponents, are, if they play e4 as white, they're only seeing the Scandinavian maybe 1 in 10 games, maybe 1 in 11, 1 in 12. And they're not going to be familiar with it. So right off the bat, there's possibilities for mistakes. Very often, when this is the position on the board, there's a huge pause from my opponent. Sometimes it's the biggest pause in the game. They're like, wait, what am I supposed to do in this position? Now, their best response, if you can see I've turned on the engine here, is to capture. It's the only response that keeps the advantage for white. If they play anything else, either the game becomes even, achieves equality for black, which is pretty rare on move 2, or it gives black the advantage. And I've seen all kinds of responses here, which I will get into in just a little bit. Another thing I like about the opening is that within the first 7 to 10 moves, there are several positions, several points at which white only has one good option. And only one good option that gives the advantage to them or keeps the advantage for them. And if you, like me, you're playing the Scandinavian regularly and consistently against e4, you already know what those points are, and you can tell quickly when they don't make that best move. Of course, this is the upside of playing any opening consistently, is that you're familiar with it, whereas your opponent may not be. But maybe the reason that I most like the Scandinavian is that at least it seems to be simpler than the other responses to e4. For example, e5, which at our level is the most common response, that can develop any number of ways, and you don't know what it is yet. White might play into the Ruy Lopez, or they might play the Italian game. There might be some other tricks or traps. They might be playing the King's Gambit. They might be playing the Vienna, something like this. But when you play the Scandinavian, it doesn't matter what they want. You're now playing the Scandinavian. If they don't take that pawn, they do something else. It's a mistake on their part, or at least an inaccuracy. And you have the advantage, again, especially if you're familiar with it. One other opening that I had tried to learn was the Caro-Kann, which begins with c6. Now here, white has, if you can see from the engine, one best option, which is d4, but they have two others that aren't that bad. And that turns out to be true at every stage of the Caro-Kann. No matter which one of these moves they play, then black has a couple of possible responses. Then white has 3 good options again, sometimes more. And it goes on that way throughout 7 to 10, sometimes 17 or 20 moves. No matter what good move you make, white has 3 or 4 good options. Whereas that's not the case in the Scandinavian, at least in my experience. Now, very quickly, I wanted to go through some of the responses that I have seen to d5. Aside from the best one, I've seen this maybe half the time, maybe a little bit less, where they capture the pawn. White still has an advantage, but black has options, and very often this results in a playable, if not equal position within just a few moves. Some of the other options I have seen, I think the most common one is e5. They just push past. Now, in that case, black can gain immediate equality with c5, which now I have 2 pawns controlling center squares on the other side of the board, or even bishop to f5, which prepares this pawn move, which otherwise would block in that bishop, and then opens this bishop to come out. We can also bring this knight out, move the queen up, and we can castle pretty quickly over on this side. Back to here, one of the ones that I have actually seen this is bringing bishop to d3. This looks like an attempt to defend the pawn, but it doesn't matter because if they do that, I'm just going to capture it. Sure, they can capture back, and they have a piece in the middle, But black has the advantage here. White's already lost a central pawn, and it's my turn. I'm going to start developing, probably with e5, which is what the engine is suggesting. And then probably, no matter what white does, I'm going to be getting this bishop out somewhere, or start working on this side and castling. Another response that I have seen is d3, which serves the same purpose, trying to protect this pawn. But again, I'm going to take. I'm going to capture. If they capture back, which most people do, I'm going to take their queen. They're going to have to take mine. And now they've lost castling rights. Black has a very slight advantage, but still equality after a couple of moves. Not bad for black. That one's, I don't think, as bad as the bishop. The bishop one not only does nothing because I'm going to take the pawn anyway, but it also blocks in the d pawn, which blocks in the other bishop. Back here, the next one I see is knight to c3, which is an attempt to protect the pawn as well, but also to attack mine. However, this just loses to me pushing this pawn forward, which immediately attacks the knight, so it has to move. The computer says the best move is for them to go in front of the king, which blocks in this bishop. And then I'm going to play e5, and I've got a really strong center right here on move 2, or move 3. Okay, let's back up. Another one I have seen is bishop to b5. Check. That one's just a mistake. Blocked easily, forces the bishop to move. This pawn protects the center pawn. And again, I can start developing quickly. Another thing I've seen is knight to f3, which they really should wait a move or two for that. That's just almost a blunder. I think Lee Chess actually calls that one a blunder. I take that pawn. Now that knight's in danger, has to immediately move. Black has a decided advantage. Another response is knight to e2. Yes, I have actually seen this. Again, take the pawn. Black has central control. White has no development, and in fact, this knight is blocking in the light squared bishop. So that's not good. What else have for some reason, I've seen b4 a couple of times. That doesn't work. Again, I take the e-pawn. They've messed up their structure in a very odd way. I have seen f4, which I'm not sure what that's about. This is just a blunder. Take this pawn. They've messed up this weakness in front of their king, and black's doing very well. I have seen f3, which is not as bad, but again, here I can either get a nice strong center. If they take here, I recapture with the queen and have central control. Here, I think you can even recapture this one. That says equality. But again, black getting equality on move 3 is not bad. And possibly the worst response I have seen on move 2 for white is queen to h5. The first few times I saw this, it was from a bot, but I've actually had humans play this against me too. This, is nearly 2 points advantage for black, because this knight move not only guards my pawn and attacks their pawn, but it attacks the queen, forces their queen to run away, and then black has advantage. So with all these possible ways to go wrong, all white has to remember is to take this pawn. But again, that's all they have to remember for move 2. The next move they have to remember something else, and the next move they have to remember something else. And I'm familiar with it, so it works well for me. Anyway, I hope that helps explain why I enjoy playing the Scandinavian. I do know that if I continue to work my rating up, it's going to be more and more difficult as I get to the higher rating levels playing against stronger players. But at the same time, every time I play it, I become more familiar with it. If you're like me, you analyze every game after you're done. You learn where you went wrong, where the opponent went wrong, and what you should have done about it. It's just going to become, I think, more and more favorite opening for me. One really interesting thing that I didn't realize for a while is that in some positions, it can actually transpose into a Caro-Kann or a couple of other openings, depending on what white plays and depending on how I respond. And some of the positions are very similar to what you might get with an exchange Caro-Kann. So that might help out for the future as well. Thank you for watching. Again, if you know more than I do about this, or you noticed I missed something, leave a comment.